All right. Well, good afternoon, folks. It is 12:01. We'll probably still have people coming in here. And we'll go ahead and manage that all the way through, but wanted to go ahead and just uh kick it off. And today's presenter is Emily Marois, and she is a local Palm Beach County uh horticultural agent, residential horticulture. And she's going to be speaking about one of the topics that she's passionate about, and it's going to be about epiphytes. So, with that, I'll pass it on to Emily here.
Cool. Thanks, John. Thanks for the invite for talking with your group, um, and for the introduction. So yeah, I'm the urban horticulture agent for Palm Beach County. I teach residential horticulture, and I develop programs for our county residents, and I also coordinate the Master Gardener program to help me with that. So that's what I do. So I'm so John asked me what I want to talk about in relation to trees. um, and I realized I was like, I haven't talked about epiphytes in a while, and it's something I am passionate about. Um, I got to work quite a bit with epiphytes at the Naples Botanical Garden, installing epiphytes, buying them, and then I also got to do some conservation work with some of our more endangered and rare epiphytes, like going into the swamps in Everglades National Park. So I got kind of close with them, and so I'm just kind of here today to share with you some of the epiphytes that you might be seeing up in the canopy, but then also epiphytes that you could add to the canopy to enhance the space or to bring more biodiversity, or just for maybe a high-end client perhaps. So that's kind of what we're doing today. Um, excuse me. So just to start off, just a little bit about extension. So my programs are the Master Gardener program, residential horticulture. We have two other horticulture agents, commercial, and somebody who deals with HOAs and municipalities. We have agriculture extension agents who help farmers. We also have 4-H youth leadership programs, and we also have classes on nutrition, budgeting, family life. So we have our feet in a lot of different places with extension, but just here to support county residents. And of course, it's a partnership with UF in the county. So just a little background. So tiki bar. You're probably not expecting to go this route, right? But I want you to think of a tiki bar. Maybe it's your friend's backyard. Maybe it's like at a restaurant, or maybe in Hawaii. And you're there at the bar or at the restaurant, and you have your fancy cocktail, and maybe you have some people there, some music, but there's absolutely no plants. Like, that doesn't happen, right? Like, tiki bars come with plants. And so plants really add to that sense of place, for us. So that's palm trees, or putting little epiphytes in those trees. Like, plants really create an atmosphere. They help add to that vibe, whether it's a backyard entertaining area or the entrance to a front home. Epiphytes can really enhance a space, and plants in general, of course. And so this is just kind of a picture. This is some driftwood. I don't think it's really even a tree. But it shows kind of a mixture of epiphytes where you have different textures, from that bird's nest fern. You have the cattleyas, you have the Spanish moss, you have different mosses, and it really just exudes expensive, it exudes nice. There's a lot of diversity there, you have a lot going on. And so that's what we're talking about today, is just adding some layers. A lot of our properties around are, excuse me, are like zero lot lines, so we can't really build out much, but we can definitely add to the canopy that we have existing. Um, so we're just going to kind of go through different types of epiphytes, and let's see. So, what are epiphytes? It's kind of this kind of scary term, but it's really a term that just means plants that grow on other plants. They're not harming them. They're just using them for structure and support. They're not going to be like a parasite like mistletoe, where it's actually embedded into the vascular structure. Epiphytes are really there just to hold on. They're really good at like grabbing nutrients from water, from leaves, maybe even insects that are around and nearby. And they've developed special structures to help them do this. There's also hemiepiphytes, which actually creating this presentation, I I learned that hemiepiphytes are really misunderstood. Like in the science community, there's a little argument about hemiepiphytes, which are plants that start in the canopy and then work their way down to the soil, or start in the soil and work their way up in the canopy. So like if you think of like a strangler fig being a hemiepiphyte, or maybe a vine, something like that. So I'm going to talk about mostly epiphytes, true epiphytes that don't harm trees, but then also some of them are going to be hemiepiphytes, which start in the ground or in the canopy but are not harmful too. So we'll go over both of those. But there's, we're lucky in South Florida. We can grow a ton of epiphytes. So we'll go over just a few. And you guys might know, I'm sure probably what bromeliads are, but I just want to give you a little bit more detail. This is bromeliads are not members of the moss family. They're actually members of the pineapple family. So they're monocots. They're more closely related to grasses as opposed to flowering plants. A lot of them are epiphytic, but they can also be terrestrial too, growing in soils. If you go like into scrubs around here, you may actually see some giant air plants growing in sand, which is pretty cool. And then you see also like in botanical gardens, bromeliads growing in mass at the bases of trees. But they are perennial herbs. They lack woody stems, and they're pretty cool. This is a pretty neat one. So this picture here is of a trichome. So these bromeliads have developed really specialized cells to be able to trap moisture and to trap nutrients. And I thought that was a really cool picture. It kind of looks like a flower in itself. They're pretty neat. And these bromeliads have developed tanks to hold water, or they trap water at the bases of their leaves. And sometimes they can even collect insects too to help provide nutrition to the plants. This is Tillandsia balbisiana, one of our native air plants. This is just kind of an example to kind of describe a bromeliad. So typically they have this kind of basal rosette-like structure down here. They're holding water down here at their leaf bases. And they produce that flower spike from the meristem all the way up. And then these are colorful like escape bracts up here, the red. And that is used to attract pollinators. The actual flowers are the purple and the yellow right here. So I'm sure most of you guys know this, but just in case you don't, bromeliads do, once they go ahead and flower, a lot of times they're already growing offsets or pups on the sides, because once that flower, for most bromeliads in most situations, once it flowers and goes to seed, it's going to die, that mother plant. But it has its offspring on the side and the seeds to kind of carry on future generations. And those seeds are typically going to be wind pollinated too. They have little hairs at the back of them that get carried by the wind and then kind of transplant onto other pieces of bark or trees around. And bromeliads are biodiversity amplifiers. I mean, there's this picture of a Cuban tree frog, which he's an invasive little guy, but he was in there. This is in the botanical garden by our work. They hold so much water, and in that water they have different arthropods, they have different lizards, beetles, all sorts of things live in there and create habitat. So bromeliads are great for that. And here in Florida, throughout the entire state, we have 16 native bromeliads. Some of which are these bigger tank bromeliads, like these giant air plants here, but some of them are like Spanish moss. So there's a lot of variability in what they look like. And unfortunately now 10 of the 16 are listed as threatened or endangered. Excuse me. And so, and this is due to habitat loss, illegal collecting, and there also is a weevil I'll talk about that has been decimating populations of our native air plants. And I don't know about you guys, but when I was a kid, I saw them everywhere, like literally everywhere. And I do see like that decline over time. And also just, there was a period of time where I was in natural areas and I would just see dead tillandsias everywhere too. So they've gone through a lot, but yet 10 of the 16 are now listed as threatened or endangered. So I mentioned these two because these are the two that are most being, that are more greatly being impacted by the Mexican bromeliad weevil. And they're probably the two that you see most often. There's the giant air plant on the left. That plant can get rather large, especially if it's in low light conditions, very humid conditions. It can get to be like 3 feet wide, and the flower spike can be 6 feet tall. And once it blooms, of course, it's done, and it takes 10 plus years for it to bloom. So losing these out of the ecosystem is not a good thing. So, so you have giant air plants, and then we have the cardinal air plants on the right. They're a bit more rigid of plants. They're not as flexible, very kind of spiky. You'll probably see these more often too. These are also listed as endangered. Two more species that you will see that are not listed as threatened or endangered because they're pretty commonly found, but are really great to use in epiphytic designs are going to be Spanish moss and ball moss. We actually had quite a bit of an industry of Spanish moss until the 1950s, where the Spanish moss was being collected and used for, like in cushions and upholstery. It's still collected today for the floral trade, though, so it's still around, and for usages anyway. So Spanish moss and ball moss, they're kind of, at least for the home clientele that we deal with here on a daily basis, they're worried the Spanish moss and ball moss are killing their trees. That is simply not the case. I mean, it could just be a very mature tree with Spanish moss, or the tree has already been in decline. With a lot more light coming through the canopy, so the moss is doing really well. So that's a possibility. But the Spanish moss, it's the same as the air plants before. It's not a moss. And then down here, we don't really have chiggers. Chiggers are more of a North Florida problem. And even then, it's Spanish moss that's on the ground in North Florida. That's the chiggers on the ground. So that's something to be aware of. But it's really important for habitat, for butterflies, for birds, for roosting, and like I said, it's aesthetic to use in designs as well. So I mentioned there was this weevil that was doing some damage to air plants. So this is the Mexican bromeliad weevil, or the evil weevil. So when I was at the Naples Botanical Garden, this was a project I was working on. We were working with Everglades National Park, and we got to go out and collect giant air plants because they were being decimated by this weevil. We took them and we brought them into like a safe, it wasn't a greenhouse, it was like a screenhouse situation, and we were treating them with pesticides to keep this population alive, because they were being decimated out in the wild. The wild populations were being decimated by this weevil. This weevil came in through Veracruz, Mexico, and it got established in about 2 months. And this was back in 1989, so it's been around for a while. But it really did a number on Tillandsia triculata and Tillandsia fasciculata. And so the idea of that project was to hold on to that population of air plants until they were ready to produce seed and then put them back out. There was some complications with that because of hurricanes and things, but it was a really cool project to work on. And when I was out there in the swamps, like, you see all the cool little jingle bell orchids, the night scented orchids. It was a really cool project to work on and really got me into epiphytes. And here are some pictures of the life cycle of this bromeliad weevil. This is when they're doing the most damage, when they're the larvae. They're chewing through the meristematic tissue, the growth tissue of the bromeliad. And then you're most likely to see them when the plant's falling apart, when they're in the cocoon stage here. So if you see a bromeliad that's falling apart, I would rip it apart more, take out those cocoons and throw them away. That would be helpful. And they live 156 days, so that's a long time for them to reproduce and lay more eggs. So, not a good guy. And so here's some pictures of the damage they do. So this is another giant air plant. They really like that soft, tender tissue. And literally the tillandsias fall apart. The inside comes out. They look really pale. They can even do damage to existing flower stalks, causing them to really die out. And this is just like a natural defense material that they create to try to protect themselves. They do impact non-native bromeliads as well. I haven't seen it to the same capacity or the same magnitude, I guess you'd say, as of the giant air plant or the cardinal air plant. But they do like pineapples. That's actually what we fed them when we were doing some pesticide trials. We fed them pineapple leaves from Publix. And they loved those. We've seen them in Acmea, Norgelia, and other species. So typically those softer bromeliads is what they're into. Okay, moving away from bromeliads, and lichens of course are not bromeliads, but they kind of, in my mind, they're kind of the same realm because of the questions that we were getting with the Spanish moss of, is this killing my tree? At our help desk here at the extension office, we have quite a few people come in and they say, like, I need to spray bleach on my tree, or what can I spray on my tree because these lichens are killing my tree. We probably get that question at least a couple of times a week, it feels like. So I thought I would just mention it because there's something growing on a tree. And again, they're not harming anything, but they're typically indicative of a tree that's already stressed or already in decline. But it's not a moss. It's actually a relationship between a fungus and an alga. So they're kind of cool, actually, in my opinion. But they can be on trees, on rocks, on fences, on soil. And then some natural areas too. It's an indicator for healthy air, so, and good air quality. So go figure. Oops, sorry. Okay, so I moved on from bromeliads. So we're going to talk a little bit about aroids, because a lot of aroids do great in trees. It is a huge plant family. It's in the Raceae family, the Arum family, with over 4,000 species. And these 4,000 species encompass things like collocation, allocation that like more wet. There's aquatic plants all the way to epiphytes. So it's a huge family of plants. And they're really distinguished by their flowering parts. So they have a spadex, which is the kind of that fleshy spike, and then the spathe, which is the modified leaf around it here. So those are kind of the characteristics of an aroid. So this was kind of a gateway plant for me, a bird's nest anthurium. I remember working at the garden and I got a little, actually it was a tray of them that I was taking care of, and they were like really little and small, and I was like, oh, there's the cutest little things ever. And I didn't read about what it needed. Like, I didn't do my research because that thing got gigantic like in 6 months. It was amazing. I don't know what specific species it was, but it was a really cool plant. And there's a lot of different species of these and hybrids of these. They're native to South America, naturally epiphytic, and they have these really cool kind of dinosaur-looking leaves that can get to be about 7 feet tall, and they have kind of the wavy entire leaf margins. And then you can see kind of the aerial roots down here, and then these cool flower stalks up here. So overall, super neat plant. Some of them can be very drought tolerant. Um, they have a nice big large rosette, very tropical feeling. They prefer partial to full sun, and their fruits are kind of little red tear-shaped fruits that form along the flower. Okay. So now we have some members of the Rhaphidophora genus. I have the shingle plant on here. There's like a Monstera shingle plant too, and a couple others. Shingle plants are really cool because they have really flexible leaves when they're hydrated appropriately, where they can just kind of layer and shingle themselves up a tree or a wall or a structure. Super neat. They need a lot of humidity. I think it's like 60-70% humidity to really do well. They're very slow growing, but they just have a really neat architecture to them that I like. And the mini Monstera were having a moment where it seemed like they were very expensive. I don't know how they are now as far as trends and availability and cost wise. But this is another one. Both of these will be ones that start in the ground, work their way up. Eventually they can become solely epiphytic, but they really start in the ground. But both of them need that bright and direct sunlight. The sun will scorch the leaves, especially if there's a big transition, like you go through and prune a lot. It can be quite damaging. We have a heartleaf philodendron on the left-hand side. This is a very common houseplant. Doesn't need much in terms of care. And then once they're outside in Florida, they get to be quite a bit larger, the leaves and leaf structure. And as far as light goes, I mean, it's very variable. They can go from very low light to more high light, as long as that transition is slow and it's not just like it's in shade going to full sun. Then I have the horsehead philodendron here, and they're both using their aerial roots to be able to hold on to structure. So at the university, we do caution folks on using plants that are invasive, potentially invasive, and we encourage people to use that UF-IFAS assessment tool. It's right here. You can just Google UF-IFAS assessment, and what that tool does is it looks at history and data on plants to see about their invasive potential for Florida. Invasive species cost a ton of money throughout the state when it comes to control or preventing things from getting too out of hand. So these are some plants that are on the assessment list that we do not recommend. There's a syngonium vine, a common house plant, as well as a golden pothos, another common house plant. Just once they get out, they're just extremely hard to get rid of. So those are two in this aroid family we do not recommend. There's a lot more. There's many more, and especially with aroids, I feel like there's probably more out there that to be cautious of. So the IFAS assessment tool is a good place to start. It's definitely on the more conservative side, saying don't use this, don't use that, just because if something does get out, it could be, many millions of dollars for many years to try to control it. So definitely a more conservative tool. Okay, so we did bromeliads, aroids, and then we're moving on to epiphytic orchids. Orchids are cool. People love orchids. Homeowners love orchids. They can be very showy, added to displays. And then we have a lot of orchids that naturally grow in South Florida. Here's their seed pod with their tiny little seeds that typically get spread via wind, and it has to find that perfect spot to germinate on a tree branch with the right mycorrhizae fungi to go ahead and germinate and create new plants. They're great in trees. They have these roots that they've developed over time that have this vellum that's really good at absorbing minerals and nutrients and water, and really good at holding on to some craggy bark. So they're very specialized for it. And then some orchids, of course, like the ghost orchid, don't even have any leaves. They just rely on the photosynthesis from their roots, which is pretty cool. So in Florida, we have about 120 species of native orchids. Some of them are hybrids or color forms that are all native. And then worldwide, there's 25,000 species. I'm sure there's actually probably more than that. And then that's 25,000 species, but when you think of like all the man-made hybrids that are out there in color forms, I can't even imagine how many actual different types of orchids there are. I'm not even going to try to guess. And then of that, there's 800 genera, so that's going to be like your epidendrums, your dendrobiums, your your different genera. So there's a lot of orchids, a lot of diversity, and they've definitely evolved alongside pollinators to be able to do their thing. So orchids are a pretty cool group of plants. And these are just some of our native orchids that we have here. Like the night-scented orchid, I mentioned the ghost orchid. We have lots growing in the Everglades, not as many as we used to because of over-harvesting and poaching. But there are a lot of programs out now, like the Million Orchid Project. I think FAU has a project going on too to try to conserve these orchids and put them back out into natural areas. This is probably, if you are an arborist, this is probably one of the most common orchids you're going to see in trees. I feel like they're a little bit more common in Central and North Florida, but that could be my perception. Is the butterfly orchid, Encyclia tempensis. The flowers kind of vary from this green to a little bit of orange, some brown, with a little pink, purple lip. It has these pseudobulbs down here that kind of hold on to moisture and conserve it during the dry times. The plants can actually turn a little bit red, reddish purple, during the dry season. But they're a cool orchid, so just keep an eye out for them. If you're pruning something that has them on there, maybe try to avoid that branch or have them move something to another one or give them to the homeowner to hold on to. They're not super conspicuous when they're not flowering. I mean, it's just a whole bunch of green leaves, so it's just something to kind of keep an eye out for. And they are pretty cold hardy, so that's why I was saying I see them more in like central Florida, up in like pine trees and things. They are listed as commercially exploited though, so they are being over harvested. But a cool orchid nonetheless. So now I'm going to move into some more orchids that are not native. These are all going to be like hybrids and things. I'm not going to get into specifics because there are just so many, but typically if it's really flashy and showy, it's going to be a hybrid that's been bred for that. It's not going to be a species orchid. But yeah, I mean, it's one of the coolest parts about living in South Florida is we can grow such cool, beautiful plants, right? And they would make a beautiful design for any landscape. So first one is probably the most commonly known orchid, the moth orchid. I call these the Publix BOGO orchid because I don't know if they're still doing it, but they were having the BOGO like all the time. I feel like they were just showing up everywhere. But there are 36 species of these and many, many hybrids of all different colors. And it literally means Philania, moth, and opsis appearance. So it's a moth appearance is the name for it. But these guys, you can put them in trees. If you want a nice display like this for a house on the island, I mean, that's definitely going to be something you're putting in very temporarily. Whereas a homeowner, like, that doesn't have that kind of money, it would be a plant that would bloom occasionally and not look like this all the time, of course. We have cattleyas. Some of these are scented. They're typically more in the pinks and purple, or the pink forms. There's green ones, yellow. Cattleyas are pretty cool, but they're known for their kind of thick, leathery leaves and thick pseudobulbs as well. But highly attractive. They need bright filtered light, and the bloom time really depends on the different species that you have. Some kind of bloom periodically throughout the year, but generally they're considered very drought tolerant. They bloom best after like a cool, dry period. So like our winter time, they bloom better after that. I want to go to this picture first. Actually, I'm gonna skip a slide. So remember I was saying I got to work in the swamps. Like it was Jane Scenic Road was the area. Um, this is like kind of, this is not the site I saw, but while you're out there in the swamps, there would be sable palmettos just covered in vanilla vines. Like absolutely covered. Like how these poles are covered, probably even more so. I think vanilla is an absolutely striking epiphyte orchid, whatever. It's, I mean, its flowers are beautiful, but I think the foliage is just as beautiful. They can get to be like 200 feet in length. This is Vanilla planifolia. It is the one that's used commercially. We have 4 different native species of orchids that are here, but they don't produce that fruit pod that everybody loves. But I just loved how they kind of worked their way through the boots, the palms, and just they were just hanging out. They're very, very cool architecturally. So the picture in the upper left is Vanilla planifolia, the one that we can hand pollinate to go ahead and create pods, and then these ones are our, I think it's these 3 and this one. At least these 3 are some of our native ones. But yeah, vanilla is super cool. They like bright filtered light. They need good air circulation. They like lots of humidity, which we have lots of humidity most of the year. And you can do cuttings pretty easily from them. They really need to have a diameter of 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch to be able to start producing flowers. So it needs to be a pretty chunky vine before it'll produce any flowers. And it can take a couple years to get to that size, 2 or 3 years. So, but yeah, it's a cool plant to try out. Yeah, it's a neat one. I have a variegated one at home. So this is one of the larger genera with the dendrobium with 1,500 species. I think the dendrobium aggregatum is like one of the coolest orchids, in my opinion. Dendron right here means tree, and then bios means life, so it's life on the trees, really. They like water once the orchid has fully dried out. They need moderate sun, but lots of different variation with this. Since this is a cane dendrobium here. So into the Oncidiums. This is Oncidium Sherry Baby. It's a fragrant orchid. I'm assuming clients probably want scented orchids. I mean, I would. That's Sherry Baby. They're supposed to smell like chocolate. The one I bought does not smell like chocolate, so I'm a little upset about that, but I will try again. This is a dancing lady orchid. There's 300 plus species of these, but their name really comes from this kind of warty projection right here. It's kind of where they get their name. But they can bloom all year depending on the species. They like moderate shade, and they like to be irrigated once they dry out, but I find them to be very, very drought tolerant. Okay, we're getting to the Vandas. This is the last orchid I'll really talk about. So there's the 2 different kind of forms of Vandas right here. There's the treat Vanda that has more like cylindrical leaves. They're kind of a bit more rigid and narrow. These are a bit more evolved for more high light levels, so they can do better in more sun. Whereas if you look at this Vanda here, the leaves are very wide, and so those are going to be better. Those are strap leaf Vandas for more shady areas. So there's kind of the 2 to look out for depending on the needs of your site. But they can flower all year long. It's cool how you can go ahead and propagate them. If you have some roots coming out of the stem up here, you can take that cutting and start a new plant, which is pretty cool for orchids. But they need part shade to moderate sun. And of course it depends on what kind of orchid, and again the transition going from you don't want to put a shade plant right into sun or vice versa. So it's all the acclimation. I just have a couple ferns for you guys. This is our native resurrection fern, Pleopeltis polypoidioides. This is a really neat fern because it literally comes back to life. I'm sure you guys have probably seen it in trees. It's a lot of times on oak trees, from my experience, but in the dry season it turns crispy, like super crispy. And then once you irrigate it, or once it gets some rainwater, just even a little bit, it bounces right back into this really cool carpet of little fronds. But it is an epiphytic cactus, or epiphytic fern, so it does reproduce by spores, and the spores go to other branches and creates more. From my experience, if I've ever moved it around, it's always been like a chunk of bark that I moved to another tree and I tied it around and let it grow over that. I did do some reading that you can take the rhizomes and transplant them to another tree, but it seems a little more iffy. Maybe if you make sure it's adequately watered, it'll be fine. But definitely, if it's a piece of bark that's already flaking off or coming off a dead branch, that's an easy way to move it around. So, but it's something you may see up in the trees. Another fern would be a bird's nest fern. You can see the spores here. This, along with that initial anthurium, get really big. so when you're talking about what epiphytes to put in what trees, you do need to consider like the final size of the plant and how that's gonna weigh down branches and things, because it's a pretty cool picture that shows how they're kind of just hanging out up there in the canopy, and they're pretty darn big. So bird's nest ferns, a lot of them require a lot of water, some don't require as much as others, so that they may need supplemental irrigation, definitely during establishment. And just a word of caution with ferns in general is they're sensitive to insecticides, so they could be more harmful to use an insecticide than not. So let's see here. I have a couple of cacti for you. This is our native Rapsalis, Rapsalis bacifera, and the little fruit here, they're really cute. That really does super well in trees. I used to mount this into palm boots as well. This is a non-native Rapsalis as well, and you can see the roots are just kind of pretty snug on the tree around here. And there's all different like species of Rapsalis. There's also like the pseudo-Rapsalis, like the red ones with the big paddles. And then also in that family are going to be like your Christmas cactus and your Easter cactus and things too. So I haven't tried putting those in trees, but it's the same genus though. But really cool plants and pretty hardy, and they add just a really unique texture in the landscape. So this is another cactus. It's the last cactus I'll talk about, the Lady of the Night. Both of this cactus and the previous one they're epiphytic, but they're also lithophytic. Lithophytic means that it can hold under rocks as well. So it's just essentially using it for structure and support. But this is a spineless cactus native to Central America. It can reach up to 10 feet tall. It likes bright and direct sunlight, and it really doesn't like harsh afternoon sun. So something to keep in mind for where it's located. It can handle humidity or dry periods too, but does like being watered regularly. And these really, really neat flowers, they're bat and moth pollinated, and they can actually create an edible fruit too. So they're kind of pretty. Another odd and end is a Hoya. I think these also kind of were really popular for a while. They might still be popular. There's like 200, 300 maybe species of Hoya that are out there. Hoya carnosa is probably the most common one. It has a very similar flower to this, but the leaves are not variegated like this guy. But the leaves have a really thick cuticle, so they're really good at conserving moisture. And something I did not know, that's why I love making presentations, is I'm always, I mean, you do a ton of research to get prepared. You put your information you know, and then you add more based on what you find. What I did not know is that they reflower from the same peduncle, from the same flower stem. So, noting that essentially you don't want to deadhead these because you won't have as many flowers next time around. But yeah, they're a good indoor house plant, as of many of these plants I've mentioned. They do want to dry out completely before being watered again, and they don't really like bright indirect sunlight. They really prefer, like every time I've seen them happy, they've been in the canopy of another tree. We have some growing out here in a white zapote tree. I've seen them grow in table palms. We're actually in pretty dense shade, so a cool vine that looks neat even if it's not flowering. And there's different shapes and sizes, and a lot to look at there. I think this is the last genus, I guess, or a plant that I wanted to mention is going to be peperomia. This right here is Peperomia obtusifolia. This is a picture that's actually taken, I think it was in somewhere in the Everglades, by Roger Hammer. It's going up a tree. They like really humid environments. They don't necessarily like wet feet. They will rot, but they like the humid air. This one you can buy as very commonly as a ground cover for shady areas, but you don't have a lot for shade. But you can also use it as an epiphyte. They naturally grow on stumps, on tree branches. We have a couple other native species that are endangered, but there are quite a few that are in the nursery trade, which have all different shapes and sizes of leaves. I mean, this leaf is much different. It's a very small, prolific little peperomia. Looks like it's growing in some rocks right here. It's a pretty hardy little plant. It's an epiphytic herb, I guess is what it's called. But they like that, wherever they are, they like humusy rich soil, but just not super wet. Lots of humidity, and they like light shade. So peperomias are pretty cool. So just a note about mounting to trees. Typically these epiphytes are going to do better in trees that have more grooves in the bark. Things like a shaving brush tree are really smooth and they don't hold on as well. But like I said, the boots of palm trees, oak trees, tababuyas, like the silver trumpet trees, all have that really thick furrowed bark, and it's a perfect place for moisture to kind of hang on to and the roots to really dig in, not like digging in a bad way, like hurting the tree, but it's a good attachment for them, so they're not just like falling off. But you want to consider lighting too. I very briefly mentioned some of the light requirements for some of these different genera, but you want to look into the different species and see what their actual requirements are, so that you're pairing plants with the same requirements together. So rough bark, the right amount of light, and then also mounting is, from my experience, rainy season is much better. The plants are actively growing. It's raining, you don't have to irrigate as much. But also from the literature that I was reading too, rainy season is just when things do better in terms of mounting. And this is just some IFAS material of how to mount. There's different ways to mount orchids or different epiphytes. But for orchids, you definitely want to remove all of the media that's on the roots. You might need to soak the roots a little bit to make them more pliable. You can use an old t-shirt or pantyhose with enough length to go around the tree 3 times, and you're going to wrap the roots on the tree as firmly really as you can. You want that root to tree contact really well. And then of course you want to remove the binding material once the plant has become established. You definitely want to be careful with zip ties, plastic materials, metal, for girdling your trees. I feel like it's easy to forget a piece of material, especially if it's not like your property where you're there every day looking at it. So you do want to be cognizant of that. And when you get into the different aeroids and things, the mounting is going to be a little bit different depending on what it is. So this is mostly for orchids. But again, some of the things I mentioned are plants you're going to plant in the ground and let them go up the tree. Uh, so just another little side note. Again, you want to match their water requirements. You want to make sure that plants have the same water needs. If these orchids need to be dry in the winter, make sure the other aeroids you have are okay with that too. So you're not, causing a situation where you're creating not hospitable environments for certain plants and other ones are fine. You want to make sure they have the same water requirements. You may need to add some supplemental irrigation, whether that's by hand or, some kind of like funny pipe or something, temporarily during certain periods of the year or just during that establishment period. And just keep in mind that if you're irrigating a canopy of a tree, depending on the tree, depending on the situation, it might not be so good for the tree. So it also depends, like, are you in a high humid environment? Are you by the ocean? With plants, there's so many different things we have to consider to ensure that everybody's happy. And the same for light requirements too. Making sure that light needs are met, but also be aware of major pruning events. Perhaps, we know we're not supposed to do those hurricane cuts on palms, but if you have a nice collection below, it's going to get wrecked if you go ahead and remove, most of the canopy of a palm tree. You could use some fabric over the plants to help for a little bit. But any transition where you're going again from that shade to bright sun is going to be harmful. So, and one last note. So I did today mention quite a few native plants. Many of them are endangered. A lot of those tank bromeliads, a lot of orchids, and these plants are all plants that, if they're threatened, you have to get permission from the landowner to remove them. If they're endangered, it's a lot harder to get them removed, or to remove them. So just, if you see something, try to avoid that branch, or make sure that the homeowner's aware of it, or that you put it back up in the tree if you see it falling. We just don't want to contribute to the problem. So that was my last little note. Anyway, I really appreciate John for inviting me and for letting me talk about epiphytes. I really touched the surface with all of these things, but I just wanted to, there's so many plants out there, so many options, so many opportunities. I really just was hoping to kind of inspire you guys to add more biodiversity, to make things beautiful and to have fun while doing it. So that is what I have for you. If there's any questions, I can answer those hopefully.
Yeah, that was a really good overview of the things out there. So yeah, there was a question. I think Natasha might have gotten to the bulk of it. Hold on, let me see. I think there might be one more here. But um I'll go ahead and read it here, and if you get anything else to contribute. So Mary Ellen had a question. How do you secure them to the trees? Can the Publix BOGO orchids live outside year round? Natasha followed up with, as long as you keep them in indirect light with enough moisture, moth orchids can live outside. Almost all orchids are great and cold, so you may have to cover them in the winter when things drop below 45 degrees. And she kind of went into like talking about clothing strips to tie them down to the branch and zip ties. So, I
Thanks,
don't know.
Natasha.
Anything else to add there with regard to moth orchid Phalaenopsis?
Not really. I think Natasha did a great job. I think there are some orchids that, there's a lot of terrestrial orchids we can't mount to trees. And then also, if you go to some specialty shows, a lot of times they're going to have orchids that just don't do well here. And so I always say when you're at an orchid show, like, you kind of need to be researching the orchids when you're buying them and making sure they're going to do okay. But moth orchids are, they're excellent to add to trees. I just make sure they get enough shade and enough moisture that's in that root to trunk contact. So
So,
thanks, Natasha.
I got a question. So you kind
Oh,
of talked about the vanilla, that was maybe like one of the edible ones there. How about dragon fruit? Would that technically be considered one, or is that kind of because I know they kind of maybe trees are not substantial enough in some cases, or
it's funny you mentioned that because I did have that in the presentation initially, and then I changed it to the other the Queen of the Night orchid or Queen of the Night cactus. Technically, dragon fruit is on the assessment as a not recommended plant, so I removed it, but it is one that I had on there because as long as it gets enough sun, it'll be productive. And it's an edible fruit and they're yummy. So,
cool. Okay.
yeah, but good call. I did purposely leave it out.
It's complicated, but yeah.
Complicated. Yes.
So, okay. Okay, so Mike Atchison here. So pantyhose and sphagnum work great for mounting bromeliads and orchids, and you can match the color to the trunk of the tree you're working with. So
Yeah.
I might be inspired here, like from your presentation and all this. So I think I need to start attaching things to trees, like and just see what happens, right?
Yeah. And I'm out in the botanical garden. Palmer's always attaching things, so I'm sure you could tag along with him and see what he's adding. So.
Cool. Yeah. Any further questions? I think most stuff is going on here in the chat if it's coming through.
Oh, I did want to mention, we do have our master owner help desk here. So if you have clients who have a lot of questions, like to chat a lot about plants, maybe you don't have the time to answer every single question, you can always refer them to our help desk. It's staffed throughout the week to provide information, publications, and whatever. So it's a good resource for the public that a lot of the people don't know about. So just passing that along.
Yeah. Plug plug the help desk, and if you want to come hang out with us, it's you got to go by it to come hang out to come see us as well.
Yeah.
So all right. Well, I guess with that, I want to thank Emily for being our presenter this month. The peak of summer here. And I really enjoyed the presentation. Hopefully we'll continue to have some more talks here. So
Mm-hmm.
like with more folks, Emily and some of the other folks that are local. Um, and so yeah, with that, look us up for next month. Um, I'll follow up with a recording for anyone that needs it. And yeah, we'll follow up with any CEU stuff too, but I think most of it has been pretty good for collecting it. The only caveat I would say is that for ISA CEUs, it has been taking a little bit longer with their new system. So it typically took only like a couple weeks before. Now it's taken, up to 2 months in some cases. But I think it's getting a little bit better compared to the beginning of the year. So, but with that, yeah, take care, everyone. And you got any questions or anything, or don't be afraid to hit us up. So we love talking about plants. So
That is true. Thanks, John.
take care.